Evan Altman from Cubs Insider. How you doing? Happy holidays.
Yeah, same to you. I'm good. Other than kind of like waiting to see if this forecast actually holds out and whether we're just gonna be buried in snow or what's going on. But no, it's cool, man. It's kids are out of school, got a lot going on, so just trying to stay busy.
Oh yeah, I saw that there was like a big blizzard coming out your way, right?
Yeah, and I never know. I feel like sometimes that's like a scare tactic, right? Because they'd obviously rather say, "Hey, you're gonna get we're in line for a foot of snow," and then we get like 2 inches versus like, "No, it's gonna be cool," and then we get dumped on, and everybody's trying to travel and they're out and they get stuck in it. But yeah, it's supposed to be like down in the negatives and up to
Yeah.
maybe 15 inches of snow, kind of from Wednesday night through Friday. So we'll see. But it's kind of nice. We're doing Christmas at home this year, so we're not planning on going
Yeah.
anywhere anyway. So I'm like, cool. Just hit the grocery store. I'm loaded up on beer and whiskey. I'm cool, man. Snow me in. We're good.
At least, yeah, it's the holidays, so it makes travel hard, but then it's all like, well, at least we're not working most likely. And like I'm in Virginia, so it's gonna be like not to brag or anything. It's supposed to be like 50s on Friday, but then be like 20 and like, single digits for a low over the weekend. But we're supposed to avoid the snow. So we'll see how that kind of shakes out. We're supposed to get rain though. So yeah, saw the big snow coming your way. So hopefully it doesn't ruin anything out that way.
Yeah, we'll see. Like I said, I'm. It's the travel that worries me. Or then
Yeah.
I feel
Yeah.
bad for. I feel awful for like the Amazon drivers,
Yeah.
postal workers, and all the companies that are trying to guarantee like late last second deliveries, and then for the people who are on the actual delivering end of that side of things, because
Yeah.
this time of year, as we know, the mail and all that, all the package traffic picks up. So it's just kind of, hey, folks, if you're out there, right, if you don't need it immediately, or if you can just order it and go pick it up yourself in the store, maybe go do that now, rather than hoping that, like, I was I got my son a baseball glove, a custom glove
Yeah.
for Christmas, and those things are notoriously difficult to break in. So I got a little glove oil and some other stuff, and I'm like, I was going to order it on Amazon, and it wasn't going to come till the 28th. And then I started thinking, like, man, the 28th might turn into like the new year, and if he wants to start working with this thing, I'm just going to order it from Dick's, and I'm just going to go pick it up myself today. So
Yep.
anyway, if you have those last minute ideas, maybe take care of it yourself versus waiting on Amazon. Word of the wise for anybody out there for now and in the future. Just dial that one away.
That is true. Yeah. Hopefully, like I said, hopefully it goes pretty smoothly for everybody. But we'll go ahead and dive into the Cubs, which is why we are here. So obviously, the big news over the weekend: Dansby Swanson finally in the fold, 7 for 177. So what's your mood now with this team after that signing and a few other signings that we'll get into for sure, and rumblings of potentially more signings to come, but what's the vibe for you with this team now after getting Dansby Swanson, finally getting that shortstop?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the analogy that I've used a few times. It still feels kind of like, if you're Hoyer and the Cubs, Jed Hoyer going into the bottom of the ninth, and you're down a couple of runs, and you really need, I mean, really you need a homer, right? You got two outs, and boy, you first batter up made an out, second batter made an out. I guess realistically, we got three shortstops out on the market gone. You could kind of say maybe they made a third out, but they're still batting. He's down to two strikes, and he comes up with a hit. So you're looking at it, you say, hey, this was great. Like they had to get Swanson. If they miss
Yep.
on him, it's awful. But you're still down runs, and I think I equate that signing to, rather than hitting a home run and tying the game, or getting to within one, you look better. It's a double off the wall, two strike double. That's great. That's cool. You got a
Yeah.
runner in scoring position. Things could happen, but you still need to make two or three more things happen in order to really put this team in position. Like I said, I think they have established maybe the best middle infield defensively in the National League, if not all of baseball. Cody Bellinger helps them out. So up the middle, they've improved significantly with that pitching staff, but there's still no true home run hitter sounds bad, but like there's no knockout punch. There's not enough thunder in the lineup. There's no real ace on the staff So you've got what looks right now like about a 500 team, give or take, depending on, health and good fortune. So, like I said, I like it. I feel much, much better than I did going into the weekend, but it still feels really incomplete as far as the big picture.
Yeah, I'm kind of right there with you. Obviously, getting Swanson is huge, and yeah, it would have felt worse if they somehow whiffed on that as well. And then it's kind of like the second, third tier, not to say scraps, but you know what I mean. Like you don't want to just come away with and not picking on any players, but whether it was like Trey Mancini or even Bellinger, you wanted to get somebody that impact player. And so Swanson is nice, and now of course we want to see if they keep adding to that. But yeah, you said about 500. That's kind of what I'm thinking too. I'm thinking like, a little bit better than last year, hopefully. Maybe they're not in the playoffs, but maybe they're at least sniffing that wild card conversation. Maybe if everything goes right, maybe they're kind of even in the division hunt. Because I mean, does anyone else in the Central kind of blow you away right now? Whether it's St. Louis, Milwaukee, I think they're probably still better, but I don't know if the Cubs can kind of start next year, play in the next year how they finished last year. If everything kind of goes right, maybe they're kind of within that race a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think St. Louis is clearly the team to beat in that division. I mean, obviously they've got Wilson Contreras now, so that alone, even if you said, "Hey, these two teams are even," they weren't. But even if we said they were,
Yeah.
that is a big tipping point, right? Because we're already talking about a Cubs team that had a pretty rough offense this past season and needed to improve that just based on where they were in 2022. Well, then you lose your best hitter. Arguably, I mean, the argument could be made that maybe Nico Horner is the best hitter, or even Nick Madrigal if you really wanted to get wild, depending on your criteria, right? But again, that being said, St. Louis still has Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado and a lot more. Again, when we're talking about that top end star level talent, St. Louis simply has more of it, and they're pretty deep. I think Milwaukee, at some point, right, we're going to see them have to sell off a little bit more. They did move Colton Wong, but that was kind of in a salary neutral deal. I think we're gonna. I don't know if they end up moving on from some of their pitchers at some point. Depending on how the season goes, that's obviously carried them. They feel to me like a team that's kind of they're like the Cubs in the sense that I feel like good fortune, like if everything breaks well for them, they could be really good, but I think they could also swing really badly in the other direction. And if you have an injury to one of those top pitchers, I mean, God forbid, like Corbin Burns or something goes wrong there, Brandon Woodruff, one of these guys, that could tank their season because they don't have enough of that firepower or that consistency, I believe, to really carry it through. So the Cubs could make some noise, but
Yeah.
as it is, I still think they're probably third. They play
Yep.
well, they get up into second, like you said, a wild card spot, barring a huge trade or something, because there's nobody left on the market that they could sign that's going to do that for them.
Yeah. It kind of feels like everything would kind of have to go their way and then some, probably to at least be right. Maybe they'll be like on the peripheral of that race, but at least to be in the thick of it. But kind of going back to the offseason a little bit. So it was reported that they didn't even offer a guy like Carlos Correa a deal. Were you like on board with say 13 years and 300 plus for a guy like Correa, or were you even kind of like you want to get him at pretty much all costs, but are you kind of thinking about the last, few years at least of that deal, or are you just thinking, hey, it's Chicago, big market, go after him?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit torn because the pragmatist in me says I don't like that deal for 13 years
Yeah,
at 350. I mean, heck, give me 360 at 10 years, right? Like, let's lower the AAV,
yeah,
give him more money overall, and let's
right,
shorten that term or bring it down. I'd kind of thrown some numbers out there because you could make it work, and they have a ton of money falling off next year as well. That would help to accommodate the future. But I still look at that and I understand where Jed Hoyer went with it. What's interesting though is I think there's a few things going on, and I think part of it is like Scott Boras, who's Correa's agent. You don't really give him offers, and so I wasn't that surprised the Cubs didn't make an offer, because really with Boras it is, here's the price, you come meet it. Like, it's not going to be some big back and forth on we're going to negotiate this. It's like, here's the deal. And if you look at it, right, this is very similar to the deal he negotiated with Bryce Harper in Philly, which at the time, right, 13 years, and 330 or whatever it was. I think it's 330. No opt-outs, and a no trade clause. And so this is very similar. Same amount of term, same term, maybe even for less money, relatively speaking, when you take that out over the next 13 years versus Harper not being out quite as long now that he's been there. So again, if the Cubs knew that was the deal and they knew it had to be something that was going to stretch well beyond 10 years even, they're not going to make an offer, right? That was just not something they were going to do. And I think what we saw with Swanson, again, when you look at it, you say, well, you got him for half the money of Correa for basically half the term. I mean, it's like the same deal. You just cut it in half. And at that point, you're going, well, that does make a lot more sense. But I think the Cubs were probably reluctant. My take on it is the Cubs said, hey, Dansby, we'll give you 6 years. He was like, I want 8 and I want $200 million. And I said, how about 7 and a no trade? Done. And so I do feel like there was more of a negotiation there. That's somewhat, that's my hypothesis on it anyway. But he also wanted to be there. His wife plays soccer for the Red Stars. They have the same exact season, almost, right? And so you knew that with them being newlyweds, that was going to factor a lot more heavily than, if they were just dating or if their seasons didn't match up quite the same. So I think the Cubs had quite a bit of leverage in that as well, and that they were able to negotiate it. With Correa, it's just like, here's my deal. Who's going to meet this? And I think they were probably, I don't want to say they were out early, but I think it was like the Harper thing.
Yeah.
They wanted to talk. They wanted to keep that stuff open. But at the end of the day, they were simply not going to match the need that was established there, the demand that was established. So, it's a little frustrating because you'd like to see the Chicago Cubs be able to be in that market and really go after those top stars. But at the same time, as much as I know, as great a player as Carlos Correa is, and this is something I'm kind of stealing from somebody else that I heard the other day, but he's a star player. I don't know that he's a franchise player. Like, I don't know if he's the guy that you tab to say you're going to lead this franchise somewhere. He's great. He'll impact the team, but I don't know that he's that guy that you pin the whole franchise to, and I don't think the Cubs necessarily felt that way either.
I was thinking, just as you were saying that, obviously, I think the Giants felt the urgency maybe to get a guy like Correa and throw whatever it took to get him after not getting a guy like Aaron Judge. Do you feel like Aaron Judge is that franchise type player? I mean, obviously, that's kind of what New York is going to build him or can bill him as. But, and I mean, not to pin playoff struggles on one guy, but we saw what he did in the playoffs, of course, last year. I mean, does Judge kind of fit that billing for you, or is it kind of the same thing even with a guy like Judge?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of put him in that same, like, I want to see him. I just don't know how a guy that big will age as a power hitter and an all around. Now he's got the DH that he can kind of ease into down the road with that, and so I could see that. Like, I do look at Bryce Harper as more one of those because you just look at the insane numbers. Or you could look at Juan Soto. You could see Shohei Ohtani, some of these players who I think are those types, and they're few and far between, right? So that's why I think we could talk ace pitcher and kind of define that. You say, well, is it one per staff, or do you really even have that many? It's if you take the elite quarterbacks in the NFL or something, right? There's only about 15 to 20 really good quarterbacks, and then the elite level is just like that top. So when I'm talking like franchise superstar, we're talking about a very limited list there. And we could possibly even throw like Jacob deGrom, Max Scherzer, Justin Verlander guys in that conversation as well, all three of whom will have played for the Mets once the new season starts. But it's just so tough. But there again, the issue is not that you can't still sit there as a Cubs team and say, well, we're only going to be in it when a franchise player is available. Because if that's the case, then you're going to spin your wheels and you're going to miss out on those star players, that next level, that next tier, because you're waiting on something that might never happen, right? Oh, we're waiting on Ohtani. Cool. What if he gets traded and signs an extension with another team?
Yep.
What if the Angels decide to keep him for whatever, and he wants to stick around? There's so many, or he becomes a free agent and the Dodgers say, here's $750 million for 20 years. That's insane, but
right. Yeah.
banking on like trying to bank money for the future is not a viable strategy, in my opinion, when you've done it multiple years in a row, because there's nothing guaranteed in that. The only thing guaranteed is that you spend the money on the player who's available now, worry about next year, next year.
Exactly. Yeah. And I understand if Jed is if Hoyer's kind of reluctant to maybe play up to what the market has been this year in terms of players getting, astronomical numbers, terms, money, all that. But yeah, I mean, at least they did get Swanson, because if he had missed out on that, or they didn't make that happen, it'd be like, okay, this team is not, we hear at the winter meetings from Ricketts and Crane Kenny of, oh, this team can spend. He's got the open, checkbook. And then it seemed like, I don't know, does it sound like there's uh, does it feel like the front office is kind of like there's like a butting of heads or like a disagreement, or do you feel like, yeah, Jed's got it's like his decision to do this, but he was just reluctant. I mean, we hear Crane Kenny saying things. Now this was before Swanson, but it kind of felt like, who is kind of running the show here, right? Or who's kind of saying, who's being honest, I guess, with what they're saying, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's there's a disconnect to some extent in that typically everybody's been singing from the same hymnal, right? We've heard about spending intelligently. We've heard them talk about you can't buy a championship. That's come directly from Tom Ricketts, right? He has expressed that, and Jed Hoyer has talked about wanting to be intelligent with the money. We've heard all of them though say the money will be there when the time is right. But as Hoyer kept talking about intelligent spending, that's when, again, Crane Kenny came out and said, hey, well, Jed didn't find anybody he liked really last year, or not all the players he liked last year, so there's still money left over, which is weird because it's not necessarily how that works. You can't just, oh,
Yeah.
well, you didn't spend it last year, so here you go, it carries over. But
Yeah.
so he's got the money to spend. I think a lot of that though comes from, again, Crane Kenny's job is not baseball operations, it's business operations, and it's protecting the interests of the owner, who a lot of people were very unhappy with because money wasn't being spent on new players, right? Cubs convention is coming up now in a couple of weeks. The Ricketts family is going to have a panel there again, which at the time wasn't known and now is. And I think a lot of this was a calculated effort, not necessarily to throw Hoyer under the bus, although I think it had that effect to some extent, but to take some of the heat off ownership and say, hey, we're willing to spend. This not don't come yelling at us. Don't bring your pitchforks and torches around here. We'll spend, but the issue in that is we don't know what that really means, right? It feels like the whole the Arrested Development meme, that's become like, it's a banana, Michael. How much could it cost? Like that kind of a thing of like, it's a free agent shortstop, Jed. How much could they cost? Here's $100 million, and like, okay,
Yeah.
that's cool, but we're not going to get anybody for that. And so if
Yeah.
that's what the
Yeah.
level is, then what's the point of even engaging? And I do wonder what that level is, because it does feel, I know they stretched a little bit for Jameson Taillon because the pitching market started to go a little bit, and that was a move. I think they had targeted him very early. They went after that. The Bellinger deal is just for 1 year. That's not much. Swanson, bigger than what he was expected to get, but much less than the others. And my understanding is that I think in some of their other negotiations that are ongoing to kind of build out the fringe of the roster, I think they're hunting for value in a significant way. I think they're coming in with low offers to these guys. There's a reason you haven't heard much from they typically play it real close to the vest, but I don't think this is an area where they're looking to even spend a couple million extra just to secure some of these spots, and that's why, again, we're seeing Christian Vasquez go to the Twins on a similar offer. We're seeing Brandon Drury go elsewhere. We're seeing a lot of these guys who we thought the Cubs would be connected to signing elsewhere, because the Cubs aren't going to stretch beyond their comfort zone at all. Here's where we have this player pegged. We're going to come in under that to start and see where we can negotiate this, and maybe we arrive at something. But I really seriously question how much money Hoyer actually had at his disposal to be able to spend before having to go back to Tom Ricketts to maybe expand that budget further.
I don't think anyone was surprised that Wilson left and, of course, went to St. Louis. But were you surprised when they didn't even trade him at the trade deadline last year? Or was it like, well, he didn't like the offers, I guess. may as well keep him for at least the rest of the season last year.
Yeah, I was at first, and I really I was actually pretty shocked, and then, I came around to it a little bit because there is something to be said, if the offers that you're getting are for players that and I think this factors really heavily in the fact that there is now, once we've seen the minor league system trimmed down further by again by MLB, there are roster limits, and if you're not willing to give us some of these top prospects who are worth displacing other players for, right? Because again, if you're talking about trading somebody off the 40 man and the active roster but getting prospects, somebody else is getting called up, but it's like for those who play fantasy sports, right? If you get a 2-for-1 trade or a 3-for-1 trade, that's cool just by volume, but you've got to now drop players off your roster. So those new players you're getting have to be better than players that you will be parting with at positions of need. I think that was part of it. I think Hoyer did not want to take a low offer and be seen as someone who was a target for such things, right? He didn't want to give up leverage.
Hmm,
And, as
that's
it
true.
then came out, I mean, they had a deal in place with Houston. They had a deal there to get Jose Urquidy. They would have that would have helped them out from a rotation standpoint. It would have been a great move, but Dusty Baker didn't want it to happen. That's probably part of the reason that Houston now has a new GM, and Dusty Baker is still there.
Hmm. Yeah.
So I think that was the deal. That would have made so much sense for the Cubs. They'd agreed to it, but then knowing, and I don't know at what point that was agreed to, right? And whether the Mets backed out or didn't want to pony up, which we've heard, and if Hoyer goes, okay, I would have accepted this, but if you're coming with less than Urquidy, forget it. It's not going to happen. And at that point, I think he was just left in a situation where he simply had to, pack up his tent and go home because he just didn't want to take less, and it was kind of a matter of principle almost to an extent.
Yeah. I think there's something to be said for, you know, him not making a move just to make a move and then having that lasting or somewhat of a lasting, I guess, effect, whether it's the perception of other GMs or even just not that the fan base has that much weight in that regard, but just seeing like, oh, you just basically gave him away for nothing. I mean, I could see where some people might say just get something, but yeah, you don't want to just make a trade for the sake of making a trade if you feel like the value isn't really going to equal or be anywhere close to where you think it can help you going forward.
Yeah, and there's a lot that's in there, and while yeah, would you rather have tried to get one of the Mets' top prospects? Would you rather have another lefty starter in there who's at the beginning of arbitration eligibility, and that would have saved you a lot of money on the free agent market? I mean, the one thing that we can look at is saying, well, hey, Dansby Swanson got a qualifying offer. The Cubs have to punt a draft pick in order to sign him, but they get one back for Wilson Contreras being signed. So that ends up being a bit of a wash. The issue then would be like the international pool money and that sort of thing that'll hurt them a little bit, and going into the future could as well, because I know they always play really heavily in that IFA market. But I think again Hoyer was, and we saw really the only moves he made were from their relief corps. They were shopping Ian Happ. That didn't come together. They didn't get what they wanted there. Contreras, same deal. Didn't get what they wanted. So sticking to your guns to an extent, I think is really important if you're playing that long game and saying, really, it's not that important. The return we would have gotten is not enough to potentially harm our negotiating leverage or whatever you want to call it right down the road, that nobody's going to take us seriously. So I guess we could see it that way. And again, part of it just came down to like, you had somebody else in ownership's ear down in Houston that overrode the GM's deal that was set in place. And here we are. And I wonder how things would be looking. That would be a very different scenario, right? The way
Yeah.
the way the Cubs look for having quote unquote lost Contreras or let him walk or whatever you want to say. I do think Hoyer we'd see that in a different light. We'd see, who knows? Contreras might have re-signed in Houston. He might not be in St. Louis. There could be a bunch of different things that would have broken. Maybe Houston doesn't even win the World Series. Who knows?
Yeah.
But it's kind of fascinating to follow those little rabbit trails. I won't take up too much of your time with
Oh,
that, but it's always,
no.
I love that stuff. Oh, what if this then this, and
I agree. No, I agree. It's like you pull that string and it's like you wonder what could have been or what would have been. I mean, God, not to take you down, a different place, but it's almost like what if they did resign Baez, before COVID happened a couple of years ago, or who knows what would have happened in a million different ways. And then, with the Astros, it's crazy. It's funny that they win the World Series and that team, like you said, they fired the GM. I wonder where he's going to go. That whole thing was fascinating in and of itself because you figure like you just win the World Series and you're firing your GM over obviously issues in the inside there, but it's crazy how some of that stuff plays out sometimes.
Yeah, and I think it was, for a while there, it was looking like, the Cubs were kind of targeting Christian Vasquez, who the Astros had traded for instead of trading for Contreras, right? Dusty Baker said he didn't want to bring in somebody who was in a contract year, but they did that actually. But it's funny that then Vasquez didn't really want to stay in Houston because he would have been in a timeshare with Martin Maldonado, who the Cubs picked up from the Royals for Mike Montgomery a few years ago, and then he came in with the Cubs, and that they traded for him because Contreras was on the IL at the time. He only played in like 4 games, never played again once Contreras got back. Didn't want to be with the Cubs anymore because he said, I'm not going to get any playing time here. This is silly. And so they traded him back down to Houston, where now he's been and is a stalwart there. And Houston was also in the market for Contreras, who might have had to go down there and also split time with Maldonado. So it's just funny, again, how all these things work out. You've got a guy who couldn't get playing time because of Contreras,
Yeah.
and now is down on a World Series winning team and displacing other potentially more coveted catchers. So a lot of that comes down to like what those team needs are. And, I like Contreras. I think he brings a
Yeah.
ton to the table, but there you look at some of the stats, you look at some of the numbers from those pitchers when they threw to him versus Yan Gomes, and the type of pitching staff the Cubs have is one that has to be really maximizing all the little stuff around the margins, whether we want to say that literally or metaphorically, right? They need to work the corners. They need to hit their spots. They need to really have that game calling and that extra little edge, because it's not Jake Arrieta there anymore who can just blow it by people, or Yu Darvish or someone like that, right? You really need, and you know, is that made up for by someone who hits a buck 90 and with 2 homers? No, but there are other ways that I think the Cubs can move on, and I think the Cardinals see something different. So
Yep.
I will be very, very interested to see what happens with the pitching staff, with the different batteries that they have that they are able to put together, and whether and how that really has an impact over what Contreras might have done.
Yeah. Do you like kind of kind of emphasizing that defensive catcher aspect of things? Obviously, Jan Gomes, and then whether it's a Tucker Barnhart or whoever, doesn't sound like they're gonna obviously target a potential, a bat as far as a catcher goes, but more so from the defensive side, like you just said, to maximize basically how maximize the pitching and be strong defensively.
Yeah, I mean, the the thing about it, like, without kind of intentionally copping out, it's like they don't have a choice at this
Yeah.
point, right? Because
Yep.
you're not replacing Contreras with an equivalent offensive catcher, unless for some reason Philly's like, JT Realmuto, we don't really want you anymore. We're just going to designate you for assignment, and the Cubs go pick him up, right? Like,
Right. Yeah.
Sean Murphy was maybe the closest that was out there. We saw him traded. I mean, William Contreras, right? That's pretty close in that regard, although he's like even lower on the defensive spectrum than maybe his brother is, although Milwaukee feels like they can turn that around. So I think those teams both made out really well in that trade with the A's. But there's not, we talk about franchise players, there's just so few catchers who truly make an impact offensively. Now, you're stepping possibly below, we're talking about below average offensive producers and the guys the Cubs are going to have in whatever combination more than likely. So that is a little bit different, although when we talk about a team that's so focused on pitching, with Carter Hawkins as the GM and coming over from the Guardians in that role, it's kind of the pitch whisperer. You're talking about a manager who was a former catcher. You're talking about the strategy coach and Craig Driver, who's a huge catching guru, right? And all those things. I tend to look at that and say, I think there are some things they're trying to maximize, but I also think these are people who, as players and now as managers and coaches, see a lot of different things. Everybody wants to cite, you know, the common metrics that we might see on Fangraphs, WRC Plus, and things like that for offense. And I love that stuff too. And they'll look at, well, here's these framing metrics, and here's these, and here's this. And I'm like, first of all, I'm reasonably sure the Cubs with their Ivy system have some proprietary stuff that's going to be different from anything we see. And they're
Yeah.
looking at this in a far with a much different perspective, and within people who, when they're paying attention to the soft skills, so to speak, are intimately familiar with that and saying, here's what we see in someone else, and here's some things that we value. And you know what? We're willing to give up some offense for that, because this isn't a guy who's going to be out there 150 times a season, right? We're talking about a
Yeah.
timeshare that mitigates some of it. So again, I understand why they made the decision they did. I hope they are able to go out and land Tucker Barnhart. That would be cool. Um, I have personal reasons for that. So it's like I'm in a different mold from maybe what somebody else is who's just looking statistically. So I fully admit that, but just kind of a neat deal, and I think that'd be I think that would help them out. I mean, I think it'd be a good addition to the team. Whether or not that bears out remains to be seen. So who knows?
Would you say, like, I guess overall impressions on Jed as a GM or president, of course, at this point, but with his tenure and getting out of the shadow of Theo now, who's been gone for a couple of years, and now it's Jed's team and all that. Do we really have enough info, I guess, to be able to judge Jed? Because obviously, he wasn't able to spend before this season very much, or he didn't have the greatest roster, and then I think he did a pretty good job at the trade deadline a couple of years ago with what he had to deal with and the prospects. The farm is building back up. And then you mentioned Carter Hawkins coming from Cleveland. The pitching infrastructure is coming together. We're starting to finally see, it feels like we're finally starting to see pitchers developing and have something to be excited about there. So obviously it's still a work in progress, but even if people were, kind of on Jed's heels a little bit, uh, based on who he didn't sign in free agency, are you starting, or maybe have you already felt pretty good about Jed, or kind of what's your viewpoint on Jed?
Yeah, it's a little incomplete at this
Yeah.
point. I ran a poll on Twitter, I think it was last week, and just kind of asking the fans. This is before the Swanson signing, right? Where do
Yeah.
you feel on this? The number one response by far was like 54%, 55% was that he was in over his head.
hmm
I
I
think
think I saw that.
6%, yeah, 6% thought he was doing a good job. I think 18% were undecided, and then the remainder was like it's ownership's fault. I think, and if you go back and the things that you pointed out that he does well, developing pitching, trading away players at the deadline, those are all hallmarks of a small market team. Those are things small market teams need to do well, like really have to get right in order to do. I mean, look at Tampa, look at and they've been successful. Pittsburgh hasn't been successful at it as successful, but when they did reach their peak, and we talk about 2015 with the Cubs, who was ahead of them? Winning 100 games. Well, the Pittsburgh Pirates, right? They were really good for a few years there when they had Andrew McCutchen and some of those. But what did they have to end up doing? They had to trade him. They had to trade Garrett Cole. They had to move those guys, and Cole is still going. But look at Tampa. They develop from within. They bring those guys up. When it comes time to pay them, for the most part, they've changed a little bit of that more recently, but by and large, they end up flipping those guys, moving them at the deadline, finding bargains elsewhere. So what we have not seen yet from Hoyer is that ability to turn that small market mentality, the development from within, flipping those star players at the deadline into prospects, into other players that fit in places. We have not yet seen, can you go effectively spend the money, the financial resources that you should be able to wield as a large market team, and can you add that wrinkle? Because man, if you said we could take the Rays, don't change anything about the way they develop and draft and do all these different things, but now give them a $200 million budget every year, all
Yeah.
of a sudden you're talking about just a monster of a team, right?
Yeah.
Because now you can pay to increase that margin for error. That's what we don't know. That's where the jury for me is still out on Jed Hoyer. This is kind of similar to how he was in San Diego, right? Because a lot of folks forget he was a GM out there before Theo brought him over to work beside him with the Cubs. So I think these next two, really next year, to me, I think is going to have to tell the story, because there's a ton of money falling off the books. It is kind of a top heavy market, but you've got another year for those prospects to develop, and you no longer can have the excuse of like, well, we're still waiting on a couple of our top guys to mature into capability and be up here. You're talking about really that's when the timing starts to hit. And I'm very, very interested to see whether and how the financial part of it comes into play in a bigger way to really go out there and make a splash and say, okay, here's where I'm planting my flag, because I know that you might not want to spend, but if you don't, and you don't turn this into a winner, you may not get the chance to spend. That's the other thing that I run into is like,
Yeah.
you got to win, man. And if you don't get to take that extra money with you. If you get fired from your job, it's not like you can be like, oh, that $50 million left in the budget, I just get to take no. Like that stays there, and then your replacement gets to spend it now.
Right.
So yeah,
Yeah.
we'll see.
Yeah, I'm curious if let's say Otani is on the market next year. I'm curious what now. Of course, that's the whole year away from now, and who knows where the Cubs might finish and where they'll be. But I'm wondering who. First of all, I'm wondering what his offer is going to be from any team. Assuming he's healthy and has a great year like last year. I mean, God, you're getting a guy that could pitch and win the Cy Young. You're getting a guy that could hit and be the MVP. What does that go for on the open market one day?
Yeah,
Especially if the Cubs are
I
trying to
mean,
be involved.
yeah, I mean, if you're looking at it and saying, as a pitcher alone, you could be getting a $250 million deal, and as a hitter alone, you could be getting 250 million. So here's $500 million.
Yeah.
Here's five. I it would not surprise me in the least to see him be the first $500 million man, because he's two players,
Yeah.
he's the best DH in the game, and he's probably a top 3 to 5 pitcher in the game, and
I hope
that's
yeah,
every
yeah.
day. It's wild.
I
And
hope he's healthy so that we could see that full
yeah,
maximum payday.
absolutely. I mean, it'll be it was fascinating when he came over from Japan,
Yeah.
in the manner that he did. No standard posting fee, or I mean, the posting fee I guess was there, but he couldn't make the standard money with the big contract. It was like the $3 million max, and he just did it because he wanted to come over, and he had all this hype. And I can't think, there's definitely not another player from Japan who's come over with that kind of hype. He is unique in his two-way playing ability, and the fact that he has grossly exceeded expectations, even the highest expectations. I was among those who I believed this guy was going to be a superstar from the start. He's doing far more than I ever expected he would, and it's just, as a baseball fan, it is so cool to see someone doing this at this level
Yeah.
that we've never ever seen before, probably won't ever see again. And the fact that he's, again, with those expectations on a crappy team for the most part, that part's unfortunate. I'd love to see him be showcased
Yeah.
in a way that he can win. If it's not with the Angels, let's get him in Chicago, build a winner around him, and then everybody can have fun watching this guy, because that's just, it's such a fun show. Got to watch him in spring training, and that was like the highlight. Just going to an Angels game to see Ohtani and Trout play. Just like, oh man, this is like the greatest player in the game right now. And it was really cool.
Yeah. It was really cool to watch that unfold last year. And he's the MVP in any year that Judge isn't having a historic season himself. So it was cool to see that. With the Cubs, of course, signing Swanson, Jamison Tyone, who we didn't really get into, Bellinger, a few other guys out there still to come potentially. Whether it's I think Drew Smiley is close and to returning, and we mentioned Tucker Barnhart. Maybe it's Michael Conforto, Trey Mancini, whoever. What I guess in your mind, what constitutes from this point forward, knowing what we do know, or knowing what we know now about the offseason to this point for the Cubs and what could still happen, what would constitute your perfect offseason, from here on out in terms of guys that they should potentially bring in or might bring in, or what you're hoping to see them do, I guess, between now and spring training or at least opening day starting?
Yeah, I mean, I think if they're looking to add offense, which I mean which they very much should be, Conforto is probably the best that's out there as far as the potential. At least we don't know. We haven't seen him in a while now because of the shoulder issue. He had sat out all last year, but that's a guy who had some pop to the lineup. I look at it and see. I'd like to see them upgrade the defense at third base, because what we saw last year from Patrick Wisdom and Chris Morel was pretty rough. Could they rebound? Yes, but I mean, give me like an Evan Longoria on a 1-year contract, kind of like that.
Yeah.
Again, been around forever, great name, but you can still pick it a little bit. He's definitely fallen off defensively, but again, solid veteran bat, a guy who you can probably get for a year. I do like Mancini, but I think if you go backup catcher, you need a true DH with some thunder. Mancini doesn't really bring that. Longoria is still putting up decent numbers. He's barreling the ball really well still. So I think that, and then they still need a couple of bullpen arms out there. But that one's always so tough because the Cubs have
Yeah.
always done a great job of just randomly finding guys out there who nobody ever thought about. Nobody really thought, oh, this guy's been hurt or he's washed up or whatever, and they managed to make a bullpen out of it. So I want to see them add more power at least two corners. So we're looking at first, third, and another outfielder. I'd like to see that. Matt Mervis is going to come up, and I think he's going to be great, but I'd like to see a right-handed hitting platoon option over there at first. So if they do all that, I feel like that'll help. They're at 500. Maybe that pushes them to, 82, 83 wins
Sure.
with upside. And the expectations are low, right? That doesn't sound really sexy at all. It
Right.
sounds just like the furthest thing from it. But
Yeah.
I think the goal right now is less about increasing the ceiling for where their wins will be, and it's more about increasing the floor, right?
Yep.
So that at least if you build that floor up, right now it's maybe 75 wins. If you build that up to 81 wins, now you're talking about a team that should finish over 500 and could compete for a wild card. And I think that's really what they're probably trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, if with the second wild card now, or yeah, second, right? Or third. What is it? 3, 2. My mind's basically
Too many,
after
man. They
seeing.
all, yeah, it's, 14 teams or whatever in it.
Yeah,
So you got
yeah,
7. It's too many. Just put them
yeah.
all
I
in.
was gonna
Make a tournament at the end.
May as well. I was gonna say, seeing like a team like Philadelphia get hot, in the second half last year and finish with 80 whatever wins that they had. If you win 84 games, you're kind of right there in that race. It seems
Yeah, I
like
mean the Braves.
so.
Look at what the Braves did. When
Yeah,
the Braves had almost an identical record with the Cubs at the break when they traded for Jock Peterson. He was afraid
yeah,
he'd be flipped again,
yep,
and they they snuck in, and they did it without Acuna, without a star. That's
yeah,
what's really wild, and they managed to. So
yeah,
yeah, I think what we've seen now is with that. Again, the Cubs are in a bit of a rougher spot because they, as I
yeah,
mentioned earlier, you don't have that ace. You feel maybe pretty good about their top 3, but there's nobody they're sending out there who okay, this guy matched up with that team's 1 or 2 or even 3. You can sit there and guarantee a win out of that and really cross your fingers for another one in a shorter series. So that part makes it tough. But again, we've seen it. If you get in, that's all it takes. And living off of that better defense, they're at least eliminating some of that kind of randomness that you let in the game when you have just last year just a poor defense and a bad offense, and so now there's just so much margin for error, and so they've eliminated at least some of that.
yeah. With Cody Bellinger, he won the MVP just a couple of years ago. I think it was in 2019, right? So a couple years ago, anyway. What would you say? Like, how did Bellinger go from basically here to here? And I, I think on a 1 year deal, it's great because the Cubs, it's pretty much no risk, high reward. But I mean, I don't think anyone's expecting MVP Bellinger. But what's to say they don't tap into something and he surprises, and then it's like a steal for at least a year.
Yeah, I mean, I think the issues there are probably manifold, but it started with I mean, everybody saw the shoulder injury that he suffered in the NLCS in 2020, right on their way to the World Series, when he did one of those like elbow, kind of the Bash Brother things, but your arms
Yes,
are inside
yeah,
each other, and he and Kike
yep,
Hernandez, and he separated his shoulder. The issue is, and what's wild about that, first of all, apparently that had happened multiple times before, to the point where he was so used to it that after that happened in that game, he had them pop it back in the and went back out and kept playing
yeah,
and was
yeah,
active for the World Series, right? Like separated shoulder, you continue to play. This is right shoulder, left-handed hitter, so that's what's extending on that swing. Couldn't have felt good. Well, he had to have surgery, get that repaired, and not only did that weaken it physically, but I think psychologically that really takes a toll on you. Man, when I cut this loose, do I need to change my swing mechanically? We said Chris Bryant had a shoulder injury, changed to a two-handed swing for a while. That can really mess with you. Your muscle memory fades, things change, and apparently he was dealing with a stress fracture in his leg. this past season. So I think, following 2020, which was a major down year from 19 and even 18, and then, but we look at the last 2 seasons, we've been just downright awful. I just wonder how much of that is, yes, physical, but a lot of it is a manifestation of just mentally having a tough time being willing and able to cut it loose, which
Yeah.
as an athlete, if you can't do that, if you just have that block of dialing it down too much, I think that can have an impact. And I don't know if a change of scenery helps, but I think being healthier, it changes some things up. I know he's doing a ton of work in the offseason to kind of correct that swing. I mean, yeah, that could be a steal. He doesn't need to get back to MVP. That's a dude who can pick it. He's a great athlete. He can run the bases really well. He gets on base well, even if he's not hitting. And the larger bases, the different pickoff moves, that could help,
Mm.
I think from a few of them. So love that pickup. I think it'll work out really well. If not for the Cubs, then for Bellinger, because even if they don't end up winning, he's probably going
Yeah.
to end up with a much bigger deal next year. So, good for him if he's able to turn that around.
Last thing. So with Ian Happ, would you extend him, or I guess if the team isn't really, depending on where they're at in the regular season at the trade deadline, trade him, or yeah, would you extend Happ?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've seen a couple things. I wrote about this the other day, but Andrew Benintendi's deal on the South Side, I think I think it sets the baseline for where Hap should probably earn more than that, especially since it's
Right.
coming from his own team. But I look at that and go, gosh, well, you had a couple of top prospects. I mean, Brennan Davis has had a real tough time staying healthy. He's got a stress reaction in his back now. I don't worry about his health so much as I worry about how much time he's missed developmentally from that. Is he going to be ready? You can't guarantee anything. We saw what happened with Alexander Canario.
Yeah.
Hopefully you didn't see it. You may have heard about it. If you haven't seen it, I do not recommend going to look at it because it's not fun at all. Broken ankle, dislocated shoulder, could be out for several months, right? So that
Damn.
that hurts him not
Yeah.
only in the trade capability, but anyway, long story short, I think Pete Crow Armstrong is the goods, and I think he's going to be there in center. I don't even really care about his bat, but I think that's going to be really good.
Yeah.
But as I said before, if you're just waiting on something, it's not even about spending money. If you just want to sit there and wait on prospects, you could end up being very, very disappointed. You've got a
Yeah.
gold glove left fielder out there, switch hitter, great person in the community, tons of stuff going on, just a really thoughtful guy and a good person to have there in the clubhouse. And so I think if you have that opportunity to lock him down at perhaps under $100 million, for another 5-6 years, I think that's something you've got to do because nothing else is guaranteed. That gives you a guarantee. It allows you so much more flexibility, whether you want to trade some guys or who you can call up, where, why, all that. You could have him, you can use somebody as a DH if you need to, whatever. So yeah, I would absolutely extend him, but I also don't blame him for looking at this market and what's happened with it and saying,
Yeah.
hey, you know what? I'm not willing to take a club friendly deal right now. I think I can go out and get a lot more money on and if that's the case, then I think they would be wise. I know Jed Hoyer wants to move quickly on it. He's talked about trying to get something done even before spring training. So while I don't think this is likely, it also wouldn't surprise me to maybe see them if those talks don't go anywhere here in the winter, that for them to maybe even explore possible trades during spring training and certainly at the deadline, because once spring training gets there, I know they don't want to do much, and then once the season starts, they definitely don't want to negotiate anymore. So it's unfortunate, but we've Cubs fans have seen enough of that side of the business over the last couple of years to know that it's not going to stop anytime soon. Your best players, your favorite players, aren't always going to stick around, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay, so it's Christmas time. What's the one, if the Cubs could sign one player the rest of the way before? I mean, I know it's kind of slim pickings now, but and you mentioned a guy like a Tucker Barnhart. Maybe it's not him now, but one guy that's out there. Who are you kind of licking your chops at, or maybe just a couple guys, because it's not exactly like a robust market left.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I look at what they need, right, specifically as a team, Conforto is that guy for me. I think the potentials are kind of similar to what we just said with Bellinger, but he's also been much better more recently. I think that bounce back could be there, and that's another guy who's probably looking for a short term deal. But like I said, I am a big fan of the stories. I'm a big fan. I'm very loyal to people, and I live in Brownsburg, Indiana. Tucker Barnhart's from Brownsburg. His dad is my son's hitting coach, and so I have a lot of personal reasons for that. And it would just be really cool. I
Yeah.
just stuff like that is neat. Not because of any inside information or anything like that, but like my just knowing that my son would be able to kind of have that connection of like, man, I go to the same school that this major league player came from, and that sort of stuff. And that's kind of neat for me personally to be able to see because again, it doesn't help me with the blog or anything like that. Like I'm not getting any inside dirt or any of that stuff. It's
Yeah.
just a neat feeling like as a dad to kind of have to be able to look at that and say, normally these players are kind of unattainable or they seem like they're on this other level, but to be able to have a kid who's coming up playing baseball and to see something like that, like that would just be a really cool deal for me.
That would be cool, and I'm glad I asked that because that was an awesome answer. But yeah, that would be really cool if that kind of thing played out. So yeah, we'll see what happens. Hopefully the Cubs make a few more, deals to kind of round out the team, the depth, and I'm looking forward to the season. I think it's going to be fun, even if it's not quite that window is starting to get, they're getting back into that window or that contention. Hopefully, so hopefully, they round it out as we get closer to, 4 months away or whatever it is. Who's counting? Anyway, Evan, great talking with you. Hope you have a good Christmas and hope you have a good rest of the New Year or, rest of the year and good New Year as well.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, and same to you. Enjoy these next few days that we've got left of the year. Hopefully your weather is better than ours, and you don't get snowed anywhere. So we'll
Yeah,
see. I guess, like
definitely.
I said, I'm crossing my fingers. We'll see.